Stems are divided into two types: herbaceous non-woody stems and then woody stems. The herbaceous stems do not have wood inside them, but rather they have a pith. They are covered with an outmost tissue called the epidermis. They do not have bark. This epidermis is covered by a waxy cuticle. The herbaceous dicot stem vascular bundles are in a distinct ring. The focus on the vascular bundles are that the phloem are always pointing to the outside, while the xylem are pointing to the inside. This is something you will need to know. So if you're just skimming through these notes, not listening to the video, you are going to miss this. Okay, as you can see in this picture, those phloem, which carry food down to the roots, are going to be on the outside of the plant, while the xylem is going to be on the inside of the plant. One of the things that's something you may recognize is that sap usually comes outside a plant or outside a tree. That's because the phloem is closer to the bark or the outside of your woody and non-woody plants. But remember, for these non-woody plants, no bark, pith, which is water storage on the inside. So phloem pointing to the outside, xylem is on the inside of the vascular tissue with cambium in the middle. Now, the cross-section of this non-woody plant has the epidermis, which reduces evaporation. And on the outside of the epidermis, we said is the cuticle. Then we have the cortex. The cortex is a large majority of the outside of the non-woody plant between the vascular tissues. This is actually where photosynthesis can happen in the stem. So photosynthesis is not only reserved for the leaf, but it can happen in the stem. And that's happening here in the cortex. Then we have the vascular tissues. And then in the very center we have, which is the large majority of the plant, the pith. Now the herbaceous monocot stem has the vascular tissues all scattered throughout. And just like the dicot herbaceous plant, the large majority is going to be the pith on the inside. But you are going to have some vascular tissues scattered throughout the pith on the inside. Majority are going to be on the outside, but they still are scattered. And in the same way, these little vascular tissues, they have the phloem always pointing to the outside and the xylem pointing on the inside. Now, the second part of stems we're going to focus on are the woody plants. We're going to do some worksheets reviewing the heartwood being the center. The heartwood is the hardwood. Then we have the sapwood or softwood closer to the outside. Then we have the phloem, and then the core cambium and bark. The heartwood results from the older xylem not conducting water. This is going to be the hardwood. It is a darker area on the inside of the wood. It is used, because it is harder, it is used for furniture or making furniture. While the sapwood surrounds the heartwood, the sapwood is going to contain more of your sap, more of your sugar. It's going to be the lighter area. It's going to be greener and softer. This is not going to be good for making furniture. Then we have the bark, which actually consists of the outer tissues. This is going to be more of the phloem. And the bark consists of the outermost layers of the dead cork. So this is going to be carrying your sap, which is your food, your sugar, in the phloem. And this is going to be carried down to the roots for storage. Now remember, what we already learned was that a protective covering of the leaf or the outside of mosses is called a cuticle. Now this cuticle is also found in young stems, and this would be surrounding the epidermis of not just the leaf, but of the stem itself. And so this is going to be this waxy protective covering of the stem. Now in older plants, if you have a tree, you don't have the cuticle. So the cuticle is more for the younger plant. The bark is what's going to be covering the outside of an older tree. And this cuticle becomes harder and thicker and more durable. Now, just as a review, don't forget, make sure you review the vascular tissues, which we just talked about, the phloem and xylem. Remember, the xylem consists of the inside wood, the inside part, pointing to the inside. It's going to be carrying water up to the leaves, while the phloem is going to be focusing on carrying food down to the roots for storage. The phloem is going to be closer to the outside. So we talked about your herbaceous monocot and dicot. It's going to be inside those vascular tissues pointing to outside. But for woody plants, it's going to be on the outside. It's going to be closer to the bark in that cork cambium. You can see the heartwood, which is the center hardwood, and the sapwood surrounding the heartwood. The sapwood contains majority of the phloem. Okay, here are some modified stems that you need to be aware of. Now, stolons do connect other plants together, such as with strawberries. Rhizomes, we saw that with ferns, an underground horizontal stem. Then we have something called a tuber. A tuber is actually a potato. It's an underground storage stem. Roots will grow off of it. So a potato is not a root, it is a tuber, a modified stem. And then a corm. And corms are usually when you plant some flowers. It comes in this kind of onion-like structure, but this is actually an underground stem. Onions, however, are modified leaves, which are going to be different from the corms. Now let's talk about roots. Fibrous roots and tap roots are different. Fibrous roots, we learned, are monocot, while tap roots are dicot. Now the cross-section of a root includes, just like the stem, the xylem and phloem, phloem on the outside, xylem on the inside. Now, roots are specialized tissues that absorb water and nutrients. Roots are so important, and they're going to contrast a holdfast of algae or the rhizode of moss, because the root is going to anchor the plant to the ground. It holds the soil in place and prevents erosion. It can protect the soil from bacteria as well. It will also transport water and nutrients and provide upright support. The root cap is the protective covering of the root tip. It's kind of like that hard protective hat or hard hat that a construction worker would wear. Think about if I flipped you upside down wearing that hard hat and I twisted you into the ground. That hard hat would protect your scalp, your hair, and everything else. But imagine if I did that without that construction helmet or hard hat. It would start ripping apart your scalp. It would cause bleeding. It would be painful. So that root cap is that protective layer. And especially if you think about how the root is digging through the ground, it's kind of ripping through the dirt. Different rocks and soil would probably be scraping at that root. So the root cap does protect it and gives it that extra protection or extra thickness as it starts ripping through the ground. Now the root hairs are actually an extension of the root coming off of the epidermis to increase the surface area for absorption of water and nutrients. So it increases the chance to get more water. And you can actually see the structures here with the xylem on the inside, phloem on the outside. Then you have the cortex and epidermis. Now, for the structure of the root, you have cells that will grow. The region of maturation, this is where the cells are going to be dividing and growing. The region of elongation, there's going to be a stretching of the cells. And then you have the apical meristem and root cap.